child and the women empowerment. She's also has been activist in various other activities politically for the human rights and things like that. I welcome her on this podium to address us and give her thoughts.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin abdika rasulika nabiyil ummi. It is such a pleasure for me to be with all of you this afternoon and at this time in history when we must absolutely be dedicated to reawakening our consciousness and the deepest part of our hearts and our minds to what it will take to change the world. We must be dedicated towards an internal revolution that can awaken and change our communities and the world, God willing. It was Khan Saab who made me aware of the fact that it was BJP's economic policies and the social welfare cuts that had killed hundreds of thousands of Muslims, more than the Gujarat riots, since the administration came to power. And I remember it was Rajiv's talk at the Left Forum that enlightened me about US corporate influence in India's political dynamics today. The US banking sector and US media conglomerates. Thus, the Rupert Murdochs of the world don't flame the fire of Islamophobia only with Fox News in the United States, but with Star Plus in India as well. So, what are the issues that Indian Muslims in particular are dealing with every day? Of course, at the forefront are the cow lynchings that are, as Brother Rajiv has said, are jeopardizing the livelihood of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. We also have this Karvapasi program that is forcefully converting people to Hinduism from other religions. Therefore, the freedom of religion is being diminished and decimated in many parts. Jharkhand boasts of many villages that have been forcefully converted to Hinduism, and they are Muslim-free. We have the Love Jihad campaign, where women are being held prisoner for marrying people outside of Hinduism. We have the Supreme Court now that has ruled against a young couple, a young Muslim couple that met in medical school. Sister Hadia was a medical student when she met her husband. And she had converted long before she had married her husband. At 24 years old, her parents took this young couple to the court and they filed a case that Hadia was not in the right state of mind to marry her husband. And the High Court of Kerala agreed that this marriage should be annulled. Then this case went to the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court cited propaganda material found in international media sites as their basis of annulling the marriage of an adult woman and an adult man. This was a Supreme Court decision. And this is where we are. We're talking about so many things, and the state of encounter killings every single day in Western UP young Muslim men between the ages of 18 and 35 have had a target on their head. Every single day, there are young Muslim men all throughout India, every state, that are being killed for nothing other than their identity, for being young Muslim men between the ages of 18 and 35, and complete police impunity. This is the state of affairs. It's very dire. And I'm sure many of you heard that Vice President Hamid Ansari's wife's madrasa in Agra had the school's water supply was tainted by poison. This is the water supply of 4,000 children. These are the signs. These are very much pre-genocidal signs. It's an incredibly dangerous situation. When the Vice President Hamid Ansari, upon his exit, makes a statement that I increasingly fear for my safety being a Muslim in this nation, and then he gets mocked by the Prime Minister and many in his party for expressing his honest feelings. The odds are stacked against us, and when we try to push forward for these encounter killings, for these young Muslim men that have been killed in staged killings, when we push for justice on their cases, we see that the high courts of India, throughout India, not only one state over another, consistently these high courts push back the cases of these young Muslim men and deny them access to justice. And I want for all of us to be awakened to the reality that we must absolutely also hold those accountable to us and our communities that claim to represent the welfare of our communities. And we're happy that they're representing our communities. We're happy to see a face that's similar to our own. We're happy to see representation because representation in politics matters, and we should never kid ourselves otherwise. There were 5 young Muslim men that were killed in broad daylight in Hyderabad by the police. And the police has faced complete impunity, and this case is in the High Court of Hyderabad. And this case keeps getting pushed back in the high courts without seeing any justice. When the people of Hyderabad asked their representative, Asaduddin Owaisi, what is happening to the lives of these young Muslim men, he's kept mum. Hasn't said a word. And I see our community's potential, but we also have to work with our community leaders and hold them accountable. That they cannot take our support for granted. We need them, but they need us. And he's an example of someone who actually cares about the community. But it also gives you an idea about the power of the state apparatus. We also need to work at holding those that are members of our community that are on opposing sides of justice in terms of Muslim issues. We need to also work with them to understand why their hearts are not aligned with the oppressed. We need to work with them to understand we cannot afford to alienate one another, but we need to engage in strategic dialogue to understand how we can move forward together. If we can't convey and convince and unite our own communities, we have no hope for anyone else to care. I have said, I've mentioned many of these issues that are very severe that Indian Muslims are facing, and it's not Indian Muslims alone. The rate of farmer suicides, women's rights, the freedom to tell the truth, the freedom of press. At JNU, which is the Berkeley of the United States, the department that deals with sexual harassment was diminished and it no longer exists. The university got rid of the sexual harassment department. So young women that are getting harassed no longer have a place to express to the JNU that they must take their issues seriously. We also saw in Benares what happened with the young women that were protesting in order for their issues to be taken seriously. The situation is egregious. However, we must not lose hope. And I understand that it's very difficult in the time that we're living in to feel hopeful. When our community's image and the way people perceive and understand us is mired in such bigoted generalizations and Islamophobic language, we start as a community to feel a sense of learned hopelessness. We feel as though we have lost all agency to have an impact on our world. But that is not true. And I believe that the only way that we have forward is through radical self-love. And this is a very serious thing. Radical self-love, at a time of institutionalized hatred all over the world, can radically impact and change the world. But radical self-love cannot be the type of self-love that allows for us to have narcissism. Radical self-love that is rooted in the radical self-love obviously gives us strength. And the source of that eternal strength is the One, the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The eternal source of strength. Our strength is with the One. And what does Allah mean? Allah means the existence. The existence. The force of energy that threads all of us human beings around the world together. And with the existence, Allah, we have strength. And without our Creator, we are powerless. How do we make these changes happen? It's a change of heart. It's an internal revolution that leads to an external revolution, a change of mind. Before we can do anything, we have to have the belief and the self-efficacy to know that we can make change possible. And here we are. How do we make these changes happen? We have to have the right strategy in place. We have to build grassroots alliances with sincerity, and we have to have deep empathy for all of humanity that is also struggling against injustices. When we think about what's happening in the world today, we see that social media has the power to be a great instrument for changing the world. And we look at revolutions around the world that almost led to great change, but didn't necessarily come through on the zeal that they had when they began. So what do we look at in recent years about revolutions that almost took off but really didn't? Instead, they faltered miserably. Examining the Arab Spring, we see that social media allowed for agitation without analysis, and organizing without a vision. Agitation without analysis and organizing without a vision for incremental change will never allow us to fulfill our visions for the world. The systems that oppress us will not grant us our dignity unless we're involved, yes. So our involvement is key. However, we are wrong to think that if we continue to accept the injustices caused by the system, by engaging with the current system without demanding justice, we're not going to move anywhere. So we can't use old solutions for new problems. And the issue about radical self-love leading to reimagining a new world order is so many of our community and so much of the pathologies and the patterns that we engage in every single day of mind, of community, is that our minds and our souls and the way we interact with one another and the way we look at the world is deeply colonized, still. And that system calls for a theology of liberation to radically change the way we understand our engagement with the world and our understanding of ourselves. We must internally deconstruct those thoughts that allow us, that are continuing in our oppression every single day. And one of the ways we can do that is to really be aware of our thoughts. It's a step in the right process. In these dire times, I look to the life of the beloved Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I had a student once ask me, I was her professor, but I was also the MSA student advisor. And I remember I would meet with the Muslim Students Association kids later in the week. And she was also in one of my classes, seminars during the weekdays. And during my session with the MSA kids, I quoted to them something from Imam Ghazali. And Imam Ghazali said that ignorance and faith cannot coexist in the heart. Ignorance and faith cannot coexist in the heart. And I remember Alex said to me, she said, "Professor, but why? Why would God be so cruel? How could that be possible?" Because sociologically, hatred is absorbed through the societies that we live in, like toxic fumes. These ideas are slowly introduced into our vocabulary, into our media, into every aspect of our lives, and we start smelling this poison, but then it becomes this poison we crave. And she said, my student said, how could God not understand that we're simple human beings and we absorb these toxic fumes of hatred, and that influences how we understand each other? So how can it be that God could say that ignorance and faith cannot coexist? I said, because It took me a while to answer her, of course. I loved her because she always challenged me to grow and to really rethink my understanding. And I said, because God is always challenging us to constantly come back to our humanity, our hearts, to embrace people with love, to embrace people with compassion, and to see all people as equal despite the toxic fumes that we ingest. And as I mentioned before, I always look to the life of the beloved Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam for inspiration, for guidance, and for wisdom about how to navigate the times that I'm living in. The Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's first act of pushing for social justice came at a time in Arabia where it was the norm to bury young girls alive. This was an ancient tradition in Arabia. However, his heart, full of mercy and love for all of humanity, even though it didn't directly impact him at all, he knew that this injustice against these young girls was an injustice to humanity, injustice to their lives. And I look at our world today, and the injustices within our own hearts, the toxic fumes that we inhale against other communities that are being oppressed, actively oppressed. Communities in the United States, communities in India, we have to actively work through these issues within our hearts and to be in solidarity with those that are the most oppressed. And I always thank God Almighty, I have seen this type of work in my parents' lives. They have always been at the forefront of social justice work within the communities that I have grown up in. Can't thank God Almighty enough. So we see the example of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and we see that we must engage in solidarity work with the most oppressed. One of my role models for more modern history is this singer named Bibi Titi Muhammad. Bibi Titi Muhammad was a revolutionary singer and political activist in Tanzania. She was married at 14 years old to a much older man, and a few years later she got divorced. And Bibi Titi Muhammad was known in Tanzania because of the beautiful praise of the Prophet music she used to sing. And as Tanzania was under colonial rule by the British, she would sing. She didn't know how to read or write, but she sang, and as the history of North Africa and the Middle East is an oral history, she would learn about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, his social justice work, and she would write songs about his work. And then she would go from community to community and sing songs about social justice and liberation and the example of the Prophet ﷺ. She would sing about the lessons she learned. In her gatherings, people from all walks of life would come. And these became the core organizing units for the anti-colonial revolution in Tanzania. Bibi Titi Muhammad was even referred to by the first Prime Minister of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, as the mother of Tanzania. And this shows us learning to do, of course, but we really need to engage in the grassroots activism. We need to, of course, engage in grassroots activism, but we also need to be engaged with dialogue, consistent dialogue with our politicians and representatives, because only speaking with politicians and representatives without doing the grassroots work will not allow for real change. And that's key, that we understand that we need to engage at both levels. Okay, then I look at extraordinary poet and philosopher, because I don't think the word poet does justice to the life of Stephen Biko. Stephen Biko was killed in a South African prison in 1980. He was 30 years old. And one of his most famous quotes is, the most powerful tool of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Stephen Biko wrote the poetry and started the dialogue that challenged the narratives of his time about his community. He was reimagining the world where his community, South Africans, were in positions of power. His ability to engage with the world and to engage his community to reimagine a new world led to, in 1994, the apartheid regime era falling apart. It must be imagined vividly and written about and communicated and dreamed. We must create a culture where we are engaging with the arts, we're engaging our young people with the arts and literature, and to reimagine the world with faith, with love, with mercy, in order to have a future that is different from the current one. We do all have the power to change the world, and it starts with our internal revolution document. I'll wrap with this. Whether we're reading about the state of affairs of human rights in India, or the genocide in Myanmar, it's very easy to say, where is God in such difficult times? But I urge everyone here to ask, where are the lovers of God in these times? This is our time.